In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Now let's get into today's story. The Whispers Below the Waves. Ethan Graves pulled his coat tighter around him as he stepped out of his rusted sedan, the cold wind slicing through him like an unseen predator. The beachfront apartment complex loomed before him, its once vibrant pastel colors now faded and peeling, like the remnants of something long dead. In the off-season, the place was desolate, an empty husk, devoid of warmth, its silent corridors whispering of lives abandoned. But that was exactly what he needed: solitude, a place where no one would follow, where the past could not find him. He carried his lone suitcase up the stairs, the sound of his footsteps devoured by the vast emptiness. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and the door groaned open, its hinges protesting as if warning him away. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished: a couch, a rickety dining table, a bed with a lumpy mattress. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching unnaturally in the dim glow of the single overhead light. Outside, the sea raged against the shore, a restless, relentless entity that had existed long before man and would endure long after. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling the windows as if eager to slip inside, to seep into the very bones of the place. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to believe that this place could be a beginning instead of just another ending. That night, as he lay in bed, exhaustion pressed heavy on him, but sleep remained elusive. The apartment was silent save for the rhythmic crashing of the waves and the occasional groan of the old pipes. Sounds, he told himself, were natural, mundane. He closed his eyes, willing himself to drift away. And then he dreamed. He stood on the shore, but the ocean was wrong. The waves did not lap or break, but stretched unnaturally, tendrils of liquid reaching toward him, glistening under an eerie, colorless sky. The air was thick, briny, vibrating with whispers that resonated within his skull rather than his ears. Shapes moved beneath the surface, vast and unknowable, their outlines flickering like mirages. A shadow rose from the deep, a hulking mass of writhing appendages, its surface gleaming with a sickly, membranous sheen. It had no single face, no single mouth, but countless shifting orifices, eyes blooming and vanishing, mouths opening in silent, wordless hymns. Yet despite its grotesque form, Ethan felt no terror, only a deep, primal recognition. One of the mouths opened, and though its voice was not human, he understood. Soon. He woke with a jolt, his sheets damp, his skin chilled. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint, indistinct, curling out of the bathroom vent like a breath exhaled by something that should not breathe. It was wet, gurgling, carrying with it the scent of brine and decay, as though something long submerged had exhaled its first breath in centuries. Ethan stiffened, his pulse hammering in his throat. The sound was just at the edge of perception, like words half-formed, slipping through the veil of reality, brushing against the fragile boundaries of his sanity. The whisper slithered through the air, stretching and recoiling like unseen tendrils, weaving itself into the fabric of the room. It was not merely sound, it was presence. Another whisper, soft, insidious, shifting and writhing in meaning before it could be understood. He sat up, staring at the shadowed doorway leading to the bathroom. The vent was a small, dark grate in the far corner, a simple, ordinary thing. But in that moment, it felt like something more. An aperture, an eye watching from the abyss. The whispers continued, growing more distinct. Though their language was alien to his ears, they were not mere echoes of plumbing, or the sigh of the wind, but something older, something hungry. The syllables curled and twisted, clicking and reverberating with an unnatural resonance, seeping into the marrow of his thoughts, like seawater into porous stone. The words did not simply reach his ears, they slithered into his skull, writhing through the corridors of his mind, filling the hollow spaces with knowledge that had no place in the world of men. A cold realization settled in his gut. This was not communication as he understood it. It was intrusion, an invasion of his very essence, wearing down the barriers between himself and the abyss. Ethan swung his legs over the bed and stood, dread coiling in his gut. His mind clawed for rational explanations. Old pipes, the wind, a trick of fatigue, but deep down something colder, something primal whispered back. He wasn't as alone as he thought, and perhaps he never had been. The whispers persisted. Each night they grew more distinct, more purposeful. The syllables twisted and slithered, wet and gurgling, like voices speaking through brine and ruin. It was not one voice, but many, overlapping, merging into a cadence that scraped against the edges of understanding. Ethan tried to ignore them, but they gnawed at his mind. During the day, the silence of the abandoned town was a hollow comfort, but at night the voices filled that emptiness with something else, something unseen, but terribly aware. Then the figures appeared. The first time he noticed them, he had been standing at the window staring at the moonlit shore, lulled by the endless tide. At first he thought they were nothing more than darkened stones jutting from the sand, but then they moved, a procession of figures standing in perfect formation along the water's edge, their robes hanging heavy and black against the wind. Their garments, slick with mist, clung to them as if the fabric itself was alive, breathing in unison with the tide. They did not waver, did not shift in the cold spray of the sea. The hoods obscured their faces, but something beneath them gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Eyes that reflected the ocean's restless movement, too large, too glassy, unblinking. Their hands, pale and elongated, emerged from the sleeves of the robes, fingers tapering unnaturally as they curled into arcane gestures, weaving patterns into the air. Though he could not hear them through the glass, he knew they were chanting. The sound was in the waves, in the wind, in the marrow of his bones. A low, undulating hum that felt less like language and more like a summoning, a call that did not require words to be understood. Ethan's skin prickled with an instinctual dread, the same unreasoning terror that grips animals before a storm. The figures remained there for hours, motionless until the tide swallowed their feet and the mist coiled around them, carrying them into oblivion. The next morning, Ethan called the police. The dispatchers barely listened before responding with a vague, dismissive hum. "Nothing to worry about," she said. "Just the tide playing tricks on you. Best to keep your curtains shut at night." The words unsettled him more than if she had laughed outright. His nights grew worse. Sleep came in fitful fragments, and when he dreamed, it was of shadowed figures drifting through his mind, their forms dissolving into brackish water, their voices filling with space behind his eyes. He saw things beneath the waves, forms that should not be, twisting and writhing in the crushing dark. He woke each morning with the taste of salt thick on his tongue, though he had not set foot outside. He tried to tell himself it was exhaustion, paranoia, that his mind was fabricating horrors from isolation. But as the whispers thickened in the night, and the robed figures returned to the shore, unmoving, unyielding, he knew there was something deeper at work here, something ancient, something waiting. The symbols appeared without warning. One evening, as Ethan washed his face in the dim bathroom light, his gaze drifted to the vent. The rusted gate sat still, its tiny slats yawning into shadow, but something else caught his attention. Etched into the wall around it, faint but deliberate, were symbols. They hadn't been there before. He traced a finger over them, the grooves rough beneath his touch. The markings were precise, carved with intent, a language he did not know but somehow understood. The whispers surged that night, forming words, hissing syllables, curling through the vent like tendrils of mist. "Ethan," they cooed, "join us." He woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat and sand. Gritty grains clung to his skin, settled into the folds of his blankets, a cold reminder that something had found its way inside. But how? He hadn't stepped outside in days. Desperate for answers, he ventured into town, seeking human voices, normalcy. A bar tucked away on a forgotten street offered momentary relief. The bartender, a weathered man with eyes too knowing, listened as Ethan spoke in fragments of whispers, the figures, the symbols. The man only wiped a glass with slow deliberation and muttered, "The sea's call is strong here. Stronger when it chooses someone." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Chooses?" The bartender's lips pressed into a thin line. "You should leave before the tide changes." Ethan opened his mouth, but the man had already turned away, as if he had said too much, or not enough. The whispers followed him home, their voices heavier now, more insistent, and beneath them, beneath the words, he heard something deeper, something breathing. Driven to the edge of his sanity, Ethan pried the vent cover loose. His breath hitched as he peered inside. In the dark recess, nestled like a parasite in the metal slats, was something small, wet and pulsating, black and glistening. It throbbed like a living cyst, its surface twitching with a slow, hideous awareness. That night he dreamed of something rising from the ocean, an immense, shapeless colossus, its body shifting and undulating as though it were made of living darkness. Its surface was slick and glistening, like the skin of a deep sea creature dragged from impossible depths. Great, lidless eyes bloomed and withered across its form, each one staring, seeing, knowing. Some eyes were milky and vacant, others black voids that seemed to pull in surrounding reality like whirlpools. Tendrils uncoiled from its mass, some smooth and eel-like, others bristling with barbs, lined with sucker pads that flexed and pulsed as if tasting the air. Mouths gaped across its body, impossibly wide, lined with rows of needle-thin teeth. They did not move in unison, nor did they speak aloud. But Ethan understood. The voices did not come from its mouths, but from the very depths of his own mind. A chorus of whispers vibrating in his skull. It called to him not with words, but with the weight of inevitability. The tide was rising, and he knew with dreadful certainty that it was rising for him. Ethan woke in terror, only to find wet footprints trailing from the bathroom to his bed. The robed figures moved closer. Ethan saw them through the window, their procession slow, deliberate, their voices a rising tide of murmurs. The whispers inside his walls had become commands now. "The time has come. You must accept the gift." As Ethan stands at his bathroom mirror, the whispers have become a chorus of voices. Their once unintelligible words now crystal clear. They speak to him not as an outsider, but as one of their own. His reflection ripples like water, distorting and reforming as though reality itself were uncertain of his shape. His features subtly shift, his eyes darken, the whites receding into an abyssal blackness that gleamed with an unnatural sheen. His skin glistens, no longer merely damp with sweat, but coated in a fine, slick film, its texture shifting between human flesh and something more suited to the deep. His breath becomes ragged as he lifts a trembling hand to his neck, his fingers brushing against the ridged, pulsing slits forming beneath his skin. They flutter open at his touch. A shuddering intake of the air around him, as though his body was already learning to breathe something more than mere oxygen. His stomach churns, revulsion warring with the unsettling sense of completion, as if some long-buried part of him had always known this moment would come. Outside, the tide is unnaturally high, waves lapping at the foot of the apartment complex as if reaching for him. The robed figures stand in silent anticipation, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. They do not speak, they only watch. Ethan tries to resist, his mind screaming for control, but his body betrays him. Each step forward is not his own, yet he cannot stop the pull of something deeper than thought, deeper than choice. His bare feet sink into the cold sand, but he does not shiver. He no longer feels the wind, no longer hears the crashing of the waves as separate from the whispers inside his skull. The calling is older than the stars, and now it is inside him. He understands with sickening certainty that it always has been. The sea welcomes him, the water folding over his body with an unnatural warmth, embracing him like a long-lost kin. As he wades deeper, the salt-laden currents coil around his limbs, guiding rather than resisting. He does not struggle, does not gasp for breath. Instead, a strange tranquility seeps into his bones. Fear gripped the last vestiges of Ethan that were human, but even that is ebbing away, dissolving into the abyssal call of the deep. Beneath the waves, something stirs, something vast and waiting. As Ethan disappears below the surface, his body contorts, shifts in ways the human form was never meant to. Bones lengthen and liquefy, skin stretches and reshapes, taking on a texture that glistens with an otherworldly sheen. His mind is no longer his own, filled with knowledge not meant for man, formless words, sigils of power that pulse with the rhythm of the abyss. He feels many eyes upon him, vast and unblinking, observing with an ancient hunger. Many limbs, cold and slick, coil around him in an embrace neither cruel nor kind, but inevitable. He does not drown. He is no longer Ethan Graves. He is part of something greater. And above the water on the empty shore, the robed figures kneel, whispering a name lost to time as the tide carries him home. Then with silent purpose they rise, their movements synchronized like the ebb and flow of the sea. They turn away from the shore and drift back into town, their heavy robes trailing through the damp sand.
The procession moves toward the darkened apartment complex where the door remains ajar, waiting. They enter without hesitation, their pale hands moving with ritualistic precision as they cleanse the space, scrubbing away the last remnants of Ethan Graves. Every trace of his existence is erased, every belonging removed, every whisper of his time here drowned beneath their meticulous hands. And when their work is done, they wait. The cycle will begin again when winter comes and the sea will call for another.